Everyone, welcome to Ask the Realtor on 1270 AM WCBC. Paul Mullen here along with the aforementioned Adam Conrad. Adam, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Paul. How are you doing?
Good. How was the drive today?
It was fantastic. I get to do more of it, though, when I'm done here. I got to head up to Lewistown, of all places.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's going to be a bit of a hike.
It's about 3-4 hours?
It's. I think it's supposed to be closer to 2.5.
Oh, okay.
So we'll see how briskly we can make it, staying inside the limits of the law, right? Yeah.
Well, you're not going to be on 68 that much, but we're up to 70 miles an hour.
Oh, really? That's a nice change. They did a little bit of that on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, which is nice. Yeah.
So that has happened. So that might save you maybe 5 minutes.
There you go. Yeah, we like that.
Very good. Hey, we're going to talk about TRID today, and of course, you and your initials.
Yeah. Real estate loves its acronyms, Paul. There's no question about that. So TRID is, just to give you a kind of a quick primer on it, we've talked about it a little bit in the past, just giving people a heads up that when TRID, which is the Integrated Disclosure Rule, changed early October, this actually went into effect October 3rd, so it went into effect over the weekend. So really anybody that's applied for a mortgage since Monday would be under the new guidelines.
Okay, disclosure.
Yeah.
That means you have to let somebody know something, right?
Right. So what's going to happen is mortgage lenders have to provide a different set of disclosures to buyers. And this is really in the interest of buyer protection. This really doesn't do anything in terms of protecting sellers. If anything, it might annoy some sellers because it's going to take a little bit longer. That's the bottom line from this whole project is there's now mandatory waiting times before you can close your property.
Is there an estimate on how much longer this is going to take now?
Yeah, there's lots of folks are saying that expect a minimum of 6 days to be tacked on to the closing time frame because there's a without getting in deep into the rules, because I'm sure everybody doesn't need any reason to go to sleep this afternoon. Yeah, it's a real snoozer. But to make it real simple, there's a 3-day kind of an envelope rule that says it has to be posted in the mail. So there's some assumptions made that mail runs Monday through Saturday, and so those are the business days that count. And then once so there's the 3-day post rule, and then there's a 3-day review. So really, it amounts to about 6 days that's going to take place now for buyers, which is going to extend the closing time frame and make it take a little bit longer. Typically, so we're telling people just budget more time for your closing than what you did before.
Okay. Why?
Well, the government, in its interest and in its eagerness to protect us, is making sure that buyers have these disclosures in advance. It used to be there's supposed to be a 1-day rule where you were supposed to have the HUD-1, which is in the past now. The HUD-1 doesn't exist anymore. The HUD-1 was the closing settlement statement, and there's basically it's like a balancing. There's a buyer side and a seller side, and it lined out all the costs for the buyers and all the expenses for the sellers, and how much the buyer would have to bring to closing and how much the seller would walk away from closing after paying off their mortgage and all these other fees, and paying those commission rates and things like that aren't 4.5%, right? So I had to put a little shameless plug in there.
That's not shameless.
Yeah. So if you think about the HUD-1 that used to be, that was the settlement statement. There was a 1-day rule that said it should be out a day in advance, but literally, we had people that were closing where the paper is being printed and it's hot off the laser printer, so it's just coming out, and people are expected to sign it then. The mortgage rules over the last number of years have changed so much in terms of upfront good faith estimates to make sure that buyers know what they're going to expect, so there's no big surprises at closing. But occasionally there are surprises at closing. Something got a little bit more expensive, and if you're a buyer waiting to get your keys and you're at the closing table, that doesn't give you a lot of leverage or negotiating room should something pop up that now costs you more. So in the interest of avoiding those types of things, these new integrated disclosures basically change the whole disclosure process. There's a bunch of new consumer education that's on the back of this that describes and discloses everything about what's going on in the buyer transaction. And then at the end, there's these mandatory waiting times that make sure that the buyer isn't in a crunch at closing time and knows full well what they're getting into before they close. So that's a big deal.
Yeah, I would say so. The document you were talking about is a consummation document? Is that what
yeah, so that's a new phrase that came into this. I don't know that I want to go to the consummation, which is what they're calling the closing now. But, it is the end of the road there. So it's the, the buyer gets their keys and the seller gets their cash, which is what we like at a closing. But, yeah, there's some new terminology in there.
Yeah, that's different. And, does all this go back to the time when we had the problem in the people being underwater in the home, and this is kind of one of the things rippled out from that?
Right. So this is, before all of these things took place. HUD was the kind of the governing authority over these things, and now it's the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Now is the agency, the government agency, and they have a lot of power. They have a lot of latitude. So they've come up with a bunch of new rules that they put into play, and this is one of many that have really changed the mortgage business quite a bit over the last couple of years. And again, we want to avoid a housing meltdown, a housing crisis that we went through back in 2007 for sure.
So now you know that these are hiccups that could occur near the end of the process. How do you deal with them? Do you look down the road and say, okay, we know we got this 6-day test on here. Does that change the negotiation in any way?
The thing I'm going to speculate on a little bit is that when you have a buyer at the closing table, the only leverage they have is that they don't close. So if you literally in the olden days, which is any day before today, right? In the olden days, you could you'd show up at closing, you get a closing settlement statement, maybe that's fresh off the printer. It should be relatively close to what was there before, but if something popped up and came into that, the buyer's really faced with in the past, either I close or I don't get the keys today. So I may have a moving truck idling outside with all my stuff in it. And that puts me in a real tight spot because I'm probably going to agree to things that I may not otherwise because I'm under this time crunch. So I think what's going to happen is you're going to see that negotiation get pushed way further forward in the process. So where a buyer's going to see this and say, hey, this 6-day, the 3-day envelope rule plus the 3-day, review period, so 6 days out, the buyer's going to see this document. And if there's something wrong, they say, hey, look, we got to fix that or I'm not closing. And now it may mean that we have to redisclose, and it puts more 3 days. It backs up the timeline, which is possible, but it's not like they're sitting at the closing table now, kind of in a tight spot.
So 6 can become 9, can become 12.
Yeah, it really can. We don't know yet because we haven't closed any yet on these. We're figuring that 45 to 60 days out, we're going to start seeing these things come together, and so at the end of really, I guess that puts us right in Thanksgiving. That'll be a great time, holiday right there. And
terrific with sarcasm today. So.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking, hey, this is going to happen on Black Friday when nobody wants to work anyway, and then something's not going to happen correctly, and then it's going to push it back 6 more days or something. And we just don't know yet. It is a bit of speculation at this point what this is going to look like. I think I can the takeaway for folks just in kind of informing people that are looking to sell their home or looking to purchase a home is to be patient and to expect it to take longer than it did in the past.
So you might not be able to put up the Christmas lights.
If you want to, you really should have your deal done pretty soon if you want to you want to decorate for the holiday. That's for sure.
Okay, there you go. We're going to talk a little bit about if your home is not selling, whether you should rent it or not. But something came up here in the last couple of days in the Cumberland area that is a non-traditional real estate question I wanted to throw at you.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm good on the fly, right?
And it's in our news today. The Rolling Mill area has, I think, about 60 residents down there, residences, I should say. And the city's Economic Development Corporation has targeted that area for economic development. So last Friday, a number of the residences that had not been contacted yet got a letter in the mail saying, hey, we'd like to talk to you about buying your property. So you're not really selling it to somebody else for a resident.
Right.
But you're would definitely be in a situation where you may or may not want to sell. what goes through your mind in that situation as a real estate guy, Adam?
Well, I mean, there's a couple things. I mean, I guess it depends on which side of the fence you're looking at. I mean, one of the things that we try to keep track of in most of the areas we're in is we're very keen on being tuned into the economic development of an area, because if there are companies who move in who create jobs, that creates more of a demand for housing. And so, you know, if the economic development group is looking to, I guess they're looking probably to bulldoze those, I'm guessing. Yeah, it's going to tear them down.
Yeah, and this is way early in the process, so yeah, I guess they have to see how many homes they can acquire and how that happens. But the idea, I think, is that that's a flat area close to the interstate that might to a good place to put some business.
Right, and so, you know, oftentimes there's speculation around you know, these types of these types of projects about, you know, who does it get turned over to? You know, who's the developer, and is it being developed for the public good, or is it being developed for, are we taking advantage of this spot because we have somebody in mind to put in there, a local business or something like that? You know, so the interesting thing about this, because it's an economic development group and not the government, economic development groups are typically nonprofit. I don't want to speak for the one here, but my experience with them in other areas is they got to do this more or less on a volunteer basis because they don't have eminent domain capability. So that, you know, typically, now that doesn't mean that they might be able to line some of that up, but, you know, they probably have to get people to sign on voluntarily in order to make that happen, as opposed to being able to force it.
Should they get a real estate agent if they've been contacted in this way?
I think it wouldn't hurt to you know, to certainly talk to a real estate agent. I mean, real estate agents are not by law allowed to appraise property, but a real estate agent can. You know, if somebody calls and says, "Hey, look, I'd like to put this on the market to sell it. I'm not necessarily looking to sell it to the maybe somebody else would like to buy it in case this economic development deal doesn't go through. What would it be worth if, you know, or what could we market it for?" So we can perform a CMA, comparative market analysis, and say, you know, here's what the other properties like it have sold for. So that might give you some indication of what it might be worth. Generally, when they put those kind of deals together to you know, buy up a neighborhood, they tend to make them a little salty to encourage people to sell. Yeah, so they tend to go a little bit above market, 10 to 15% above market, just to try to get people to make the move. Got to give you some incentive, right? You got to pick yourself up and move if you weren't thinking about moving, and try to get more people to do it.
I talked to a guy on the phone that was in his home for 30 years.
Right.
And he has neighbors who have been in their homes for 45 and 50 years, and he has a lot of questions at this point. I think I'll ask Adam.
Right. Well,
he's seen this come down, and it kind of fed into what we were talking about a couple of weeks ago about the emotional attachment that you have to your home. And if you've been there 30 years, 40 years,
right,
you know, that is your life.
Right. And I think it's going to be very difficult for most folks that have a home they've lived in for 30 or 40 years, regardless of the condition of that home. It's going to be a big upheaval for them to make a move, and it may be difficult to find, even with a premium on the property, to make the move of actually selling and then purchasing another property. That's really what they got to look at. I mean, is it something that they can make a swap and go into something different? And it could be a bluebird, as we like to say, that just flew in. You know, it could be like, hey, somebody's going to come in and buy my house. I might not have otherwise sold it. So there's a lot of things up in the air when that type of thing happens.
Yeah, a group was at the city council meeting last night, and they were kind of concerned in the same way. So I thought we'd touch on that today, being topical as we are.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Happy to throw my opinion in. You know, it's you know, these are all, you know, again, mine's really speculation. It's just strictly my opinion, not ever legal advice, right? But it you know, there's a lot of things that come up when people really discuss those types of things, and you know, because what value can you put on a place and all the memories that you've had in it? And if you really don't have any desire to move, right, you know, maybe you just don't want to move. You tell them no thanks. And if
it's a whole new equation,
right,
from what we've been talking about. Usually somebody is saying, okay, I want to move now, and I want to make it attractive to somebody else. Actually, you're not trying to make your house more attractive now. If this is the situation, you're kind of saying, okay, well, what can I get out of it? And it's basically a dollars and cents thing.
Sure.
Side of the emotion.
Right. Well, and we've talked before about what are the drivers of real estate, and we've been adding D's to our 3 Ds. Death, debt, and divorce are the big drivers of real estate sales. So those things actually impact sales of real estate more than anything because it creates a critical event or a pinch point, a juncture that you have to do something. Somebody who desires to buy a home may be interested in buying a home and say, yeah, I'd like to do it, but unless there's some critical event, they may not buy a home. They may just decide, I thought it'd be nice to buy, but maybe not.
Okay. Well, if you're out there and you're in that situation, that's what we can give you today.
You bet.
The informed opinion of Adam Conrad.
Yeah.
Now, we were going to talk a little bit today about if your home is not selling, you're on the market, whether you should rent it out. And that kind of fits into the programming day because Dave Ramsey comes on here about 1 o'clock. A lot of people call in with asking for advice, and then he goes, well, what kind of investments do you have? Well, I have some real estate investments that I'm renting right now. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about if your home is on the market and you are not able to move it as quickly as you may have thought, or maybe you have to do some things to it before it moves.
Right.
Should you rent it?
Yeah, and the reason I brought this up, actually, this is topical for me because somebody stopped me on the way into a radio program yesterday and said, hey, do you have any rentals with X number of bedrooms and bathrooms? And it was really outside of the typical rental that we have. I mean, they were looking for 4 bedrooms and 3 baths. That's not your typical rental. The 3-1, 3-1.5 are typical. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 bath is fairly typical for a rental. But 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a little bit outside the norm.
You're renting a castle.
Yeah, that's going to be in probably in a more expensive place. And so I talked about it on. We're going to talk about it on the radio show tomorrow in Altoona. And we'll probably talk about it on the TV show this week as well. But I thought it was topical, and if I try to get that word out to the folks that, you want to give some thought to perhaps if you've got a property that you're not occupying, obviously, or if you've got a property that you'd like to move out of and move into something else, if you can afford the mortgage, if you've got a mortgage or you can do a bridge mortgage or something like that, and with a lender understanding you're going to rent your existing property, it's worth taking a look at. It's at least, kick it around a little bit. I'm not advocating one way or the other. I think it's just worth a discussion.
Yeah. I guess there are a number of ways to look at it.
Sure.
Some people would think, well, I don't want to get into the landlord-tenant thing. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that becomes adversarial.
Right. And I'll tell you that if you only have one rental property, it's not a good idea to be a landlord at all. Because there are so many rules, so many considerations, things that you don't know, and the unknown will get you in rentals. Ask me how I know. Lessons learned with yes, lessons I've learned with money in my time. So if you don't have the experience of going to eviction hearing in front of a magistrate, if you don't have an experience writing a lease, or filling out a lease, selecting tenants, setting up rules, escrows for the deposits and collecting rent. If you've not done that, using your own property as a putting a set of training wheels on that bike and riding it, not a good idea.
I would imagine too that a lot of people that rent are younger rather than older.
That's interesting that you say that, but I think my experience is that it's all over the board now. Yeah, a lot of folks, I tell you, folks that are getting up in years have little desire in a lot of cases to care for a property. They want somebody taking care of the maintenance. And even if it is a property that they may be responsible for lawn care or something like that, they're really looking to. A lot of folks are looking to simplify. Maybe they're getting older. They want to go visit grandchildren. They want to travel. There's a lot of folks that across the board. It's really interesting to me because I've done rentals for over 20 years, and it's really interesting to me the wide array. Yeah, and I think it does skew to younger because they haven't had enough experience in capital to purchase a home. But you'd be surprised how many people across the board in all age categories rent.
Okay. Yeah, I was going by my own life.
Yeah.
I got married at 32. That's when I became a homeowner.
Right.
Before that, though, it was rent here for a little while, a couple years, then moved down. You know.
Sure.
I was on the lake for 4 years.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
The last great deal on Deep Creek Lake.
Oh, yeah. So there are a number of younger folks that are renting, but a lot of the younger folks also want to own as quickly as they can too. They want to build equity. They want to build up. A lot of folks use their home as a primary savings vehicle, so they want to build up some equity. They look at rent amounts. Rent prices are high now. I mean, they're really at their peak. They're higher than they've ever been, and so folks that have been renting for a long time have really seen rent rates go up over time, and they're staring at those rent amounts and saying, geez, I could really own this place for a lot less.
Yeah, and that's why I made the assumption I did earlier. Why do you put money into rent when you could own and build some equity, and then eventually you could cash out and move somewhere else?
Right, and there are a lot of folks out there that lost a home in the last mortgage crisis that have good income, that have bad credit still. Because of, maybe, and the same goes for somebody that's gone through a divorce. They may have fantastic income, but their credit may have gotten wrecked during a divorce. So they really can't purchase. They can't get a loan. So they're looking for rentals. So there's a good pool of solid renters out there.
Okay, so there is a market to be satisfied.
Absolutely. It's a very strong market. Matter of fact, it's so strong that rent rates keep going up as a result, and that's across the country. Rent rates are going up. I mean, I don't know anywhere rent's going down.
Okay, suppose I have the empty house. What should I think about before I make that decision, outside of the tenant-landlord thing that we just went over?
Well, if it's vacant and you're not going to rent it, you got some other considerations, particularly as our weather. We had some super frigid weather here last year. So, if you've got hot water, heat, you've got to make sure that you either make sure that furnace is going to be running, and you got to make sure there's nothing that would possibly cut that furnace off, because if it goes off for a couple of days and you don't know it because it's vacant, you could have a real problem on your hands with radiators. You could have just tens of thousands of dollars of damage. So the other thing you need to do right off the bat, if it's going to be vacant for any period of time, is alert your insurance agent. Most insurance companies have a provision in there. Policies have a provision that specify that you have to let them know that the property is vacant, because vacant property, it has a much higher risk to an insurance company than non-vacant. If it's vacant, it's an arson risk, it's a vandalism risk, it's a damage risk, and insurance companies do not like vacant property. So they don't mind it vacant while you're marketing it for sale, but if it's going to be vacant and you've taken it off the market or something like that for the winter and it's a plain old vacant, you probably want to check with your insurance agent.
So getting ready to rent a property is kind of like getting ready to sell it?
Yeah, very much so, because you've got to try to attract a renter. You want to be able to get a good rental rate. And the best way you're going to be able to pull that off is to talk to a property manager. We do property management at Perry Wellington. We haven't done a lot in Cumberland. We're still the new kid on the block, so to speak. We've got many experienced agents, but we're still the new kid on the block. We do a limited amount of property management here in Cumberland. We do it very strong in other areas, and we're actually starting property management in other parts of Maryland as well. So we're kind of gearing that up. This isn't really a plug for our property management. It just struck me that it's something we hadn't talked about.
No, we haven't. And when you're setting rent, I guess the property manager could probably give you an idea of what you could get as far as rent goes, but you certainly have to cover your costs.
Absolutely. And I'll never forget, I used to be the president of a landlord association, and I had a guy come to a meeting once, and he was just tickled pink that he had a house that he had paid off, and he was getting $550 a month rent. And so I said, well, tell me a little bit about the property. And he described that it had a swimming pool. It was 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. I asked him, I said, Joe, what do you think that property's worth? He said, oh, it's probably 110, 115, somewhere in that ballpark. I said, well, you're really under rent. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, you're getting $525 or $550 a month. I said, you're not getting anywhere near what you should be getting. Oh, but it's free and clear money every month, Adam. I'm like, but it's not a good return on a $110,000 investment. He said, yeah, but I got a good tenant in there. He said, they've been in there and I don't have to worry about them. I said, that's great, but who would leave? I said, tell you what, if they get ornery on you or they want to move, I'll move in. I said, for that kind of money a month, that's a bargain. And I said, you should never lose that tenant. I said, but probably they're under rent by at least $200 a month. And he was stunned by my comment. I said, you should be charging probably $750 to $800 a month. And he was shocked by that. And I said, or what you ought to do is just sell the place. And he looked at me again in total disbelief. And I said, what you should do is sell the place for $110 and buy 255s and rent them for $500 a month. Now you'll have $1,000 a month coming in instead of $550. You actually have a better return on your investment.
Did he have an emotional connection to the house?
Yes, he did.
Okay.
Yeah, he very much did. And I get that, and I understand it about asset preservation, and he was concerned about it being damaged and whatnot. But I said, look, if you've got an asset, if you've got an asset worth $150,000, you ought not be renting it for $500 to $550 a month. I know the previous example was less, but we run into that where people have expensive homes and they rent them very inexpensively. And so really you need to either sell that asset or get the rent moved up. And if you can't get the rent moved up, then you really shouldn't be hanging on to it as a rental.
Who should you rent to? This is one that just comes off the top of my head. Should you rent a total stranger, or would you like to have someone referred to you by a family or friend? Because I think that could cut both ways.
Yeah, we refer to the people that you rent to, the family and friend people you rent to, as former family and former friends, because it's unlikely that that's going to work out really well for you. I can tell you dozens and dozens of stories, personal and others that have been retold to me, that doesn't work out so well. I'd much rather have a perfect stranger that I don't have any ties to emotionally, because it just, that way you can treat it like the business it ought to be.
I agree with that. I've seen that work both ways. Mm-hmm. Family and friends recommend somebody and everything works out fine. But I've seen people almost destroy their families because. Yeah,
there's a lot of things you'll do wrong in the process of renting to friends or family. You won't write a lease. You'll just take their word. You won't collect a security deposit. You won't enforce things like pet policies, and then you'll get the property back in very poor condition, and then you'll never speak to them again. And so, at what price, do you want to help out a friend? Because the best way is to hire a property manager and get it done correctly.
Barry Wellington Realty in Cumberland here. How do we reach your folks and then you, Adam?
And that number locally here on Washington Street is 240-979-4660, and one of the staff can help you out.
Okay, and of course you're driving back and forth. Will you answer your phone?
Yeah, I do. So you want to give me a ring, 814-934-5246.
All right. Join us again next Wednesday afternoon at 12:30. It's Ask the Realtor on 1270 AM WCBC with our real estate friend and mentor, Adam Conrad. Thank you, Adam.
Thanks, Paul.